All right. Got a busy day tomorrow, so I'm just going to get this out of the way now rather than trying to find time to record something tomorrow morning or in the afternoon or have to delay getting it up for you. I just wanted to come on here real quick and give my initial thoughts on the race here and what I think some people are calling the commercial 500 with limited Daytona interruption. I think that's what we watched here this evening. It's a shame because I really did think it was a pretty good Daytona 475, 480, if you will. I thought, there was some great side-by-side racing all throughout the pack. It wasn't a complete snooze fest by any of the imagination. I think the struggle was just trying to stay invested because every 8 to 10 laps, Fox would go back into commercial here. And I don't know if it's just a matter of us being more aware of the commercial breaks now. I don't know if, what Formula One and ESPN have done here for us is, raised our expectations. Race fans are no longer content with putting up with this many commercials here. I don't know. I think that, ESPN, to their credit, and I know that a lot of people have criticized their commercial coverage here, or commercial coverage, motorsports coverage, over the last several years, but they put together an atrocious first broadcast, Australia in 2018. I still remember that. I was, alone in my college dorm room watching that at 1 a.m. in the morning. It was the worst viewing experience I've ever had. They simulcast the Sky Sports feed, and that's all they were doing, and they still had technical difficulties somehow doing that. And it was just a complete disaster. There was nobody to lead them in and out of commercial breaks, so they kept taking commercial breaks, cutting the commentators off mid-sentence. Thankfully, they were at least side by side, but we missed a bunch of radio messages that we never got to circle back to. ESPN saw that, and they brought on Mother's Polish, and I think CrowdStrike has done a few races as well, a couple of other presenting sponsors, and now the coverage is presented exclusively by, most of the time, it's Mother's Polish here, and they just simulcast the Sky feed from the UK, which is commercial-free to begin with, and we don't miss a single lap of the racing action. And I think you've seen Formula One's boom and rise in popularity here in the United States. You understand how popular it's gotten. There's been a lot more crossover. I'm certainly watching more Formula One than I ever have, even though I got into it a few years before the Drive to Survive ESPN era. I understand that, there are a lot of people that are watching, both sports now. I know some NASCAR fans think NASCAR rules overall and everything else is irrelevant. I'm sorry, that's just not true. There are a lot of people that watch both, and I think the people that do watch both see what F1 has to offer from a viewing experience perspective alone, and they come over to NASCAR and they see how many commercials we have on a Fox broadcast, how many commercials, and NBC's just as guilty of it too. We call NBC nothing but commercials for a reason here. It's just incredibly, incredibly frustrating as a viewer to sit through that and watch, what I say at the start of this, the commercial 500 with limited racing interruption or with limited Daytona interruption. That's what it felt like today. And I watched part of David Land's video. I know he mentioned that he saw somewhere that there was a stat that the amount of commercials was on par with what we had in 2007, which happened to be the first 500 I ever watched. I don't know if I just didn't notice it as a kid or what, but I think that part of it is, the change of our expectations. Part of it might be social media. I know we had, there were Facebook groups, and I guess you would have had MySpace back in the day as well. People complaining about how often TNT went to commercial. So I don't think this whole thing is entirely new. But it does seem like the last few years in particular, we've really, really seen an increase in the number of commercials that these broadcasts are showing, and half of them weren't even side by side. That was the other thing. It's very frustrating to watch, and I guess my biggest frustration comes from the fact that, and I mentioned this on the Grid Show tonight as well, I can't think of a single other sport where you take full screen commercial breaks during the action, during the game, during the race, whatever you want to call it. We take full screen commercial breaks. We can't see what's going on, and there's a chance, a risk that we might miss something crucial to the outcome of the race. I guess the other best comparison that you can do for a sport that has a lot of uninterrupted action is soccer, right? You have 45-minute halves plus stoppage time. The clock doesn't stop here. But to get around that, they have advertising boards and banners and screens that are constantly changing on the perimeter of the stadium. They have pop-ups here throughout the halves sometimes that presenting sponsors will be a part of. So NASCAR and other forms of racing, if you want to throw IndyCar and IMSA in there as well, it's the only sport that I can think of that does this. And I think that that's something that really needs to, if not change, because I understand bills have to be paid. I understand commercials are a necessary evil in some sense, and I understand NASCAR races are longer than F1 races as well, but there needs to be some sort of way, like we need to have the partners that we have in our sport. Like, how much ROI is Coca-Cola really getting on those repetitive Coke Zero Sugar ads that they kept showing all throughout the race? When how many NASCAR fans don't know of Coca-Cola's presence in the sport, right? We're constantly told about the Coca-Cola racing family of drivers. Their name comes up. They sponsor some of the onboards sometimes. They're the official soft drink of NASCAR, I believe. It's not like people don't know what Coca-Cola is. It's not like people don't know what NASCAR is. Half these ads are for NASCAR or for the next race. I mean, the next race I kind of get in some respects, but did you know it's NASCAR's 75th anniversary? I certainly did. I think most people watching were at least generally aware of that. Yet we see that same commercial time and time again, and I don't know. It's just it's incredibly frustrating for us to have to deal with. The other thing that really frustrated me about the race was, how it ended. And, people know that I'm beating a dead horse here with how I feel about overtime, but, man, I mean, I don't know if I were Kyle Busch right now, I'd be pretty upset. And obviously he's biased. He would have won the race. He was the leader at 500 miles, but the race shouldn't even be called the Daytona 500. It's the number at the end of this race is completely meaningless now, because almost every year the intensity gets turned up to the end of a race. We see an accident, they throw the caution, and the race inevitably gets extended. And then it probably happens again. It gets extended again before we can even finish it. It bothers me as somebody who, values words and what they mean and the definitions of things, that a race called the Daytona 500 can have the guy that is leading at the end of 500 miles not be the winner of the race. It's incredibly, incredibly frustrating to me that we continue to deal with that year after year after year. And I don't know, people loved what happened in 1998. If that had happened today, we'd be talking about Kyle Busch winning the Daytona 500. I don't think very many people would be complaining. I know Kyle Busch's haters certainly would be complaining, but people that value the history of the sport and appreciate Kyle Busch's career, this is the one major thing in NASCAR that he's yet to do. I think it would have been a great story. And that's no disrespect to Ricky Stenhouse Jr., but it's just, I don't know. I think the storylines of if Kyle had won this race, particularly on the, keeping in mind what happened with him moving from Joe Gibbs to Richard Childress this offseason and that whole deal that, dominated the headlines last year, it would have been a fantastic story. And, we could have had that today, but we insisted on trying to get a green flag finish, which we didn't even get because they wrecked again after the white flag, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. ended up winning it under caution instead. So, overall, like I mentioned, it was a pretty good race for most of it. But, towards the end there, I was just reminded of my frustrations with the overtime rules, particularly on super speedways, which have become complete crapshoots towards the end of it. And then obviously the commercials as well. I don't think very many people, didn't have that complaint, especially in the first half of the race. And I think NASCAR really needs to prioritize that and think of something that they can do to try to alleviate some of that frustration from a lot of fans and from the viewing experience. Because I think it's really, really hit a new level, over these last several years, and particularly with what we saw today. So that's those are my overall opinions on the race. I see we had a few people join the chat here tonight. Dave, I appreciate the support on the game show videos. The Jeopardy contestant interview, that was a one-time thing. I have a friend of a friend that kind of is how we got Emmy onto the podcast here, but I don't think I'm going to be doing any of those, at least not in the near future. I don't have, I'm not as well plugged into that world, so I'm not sure how we could get some of those people on the podcast there. But I appreciate the support. I appreciate you tuning in tonight. Thank you, Matthew and Eric, for tuning in as well. I'm definitely going to save this, maybe repost it to my channel or something. We'll see. What we can do. I've enjoyed doing these the last couple of weeks. I know we did one after the Super Bowl as well. So hopefully, we can do this a little bit more often, and this can give me an outlet to, give my own longer personal thoughts on the races or whatever major sporting event is going on in the future, and not be under the restriction of having to keep my answers to 2 or 3 minutes to pass it off to the next person on the grid shows. But thank you all for tuning in. I'll be on Grid, obviously, hosting the Encore show tomorrow. So we'll recap Xfinity Trucks and ARCA and a couple of other things then. And I'll see you all over there. Have a good night.